Hi everyone, I'm Sarah and welcome back to my channel. I thought I would do a mid-month wrap-up, but I wanted to wait to do this wrap-up until after the reading rush weekend so I could have more books to talk about. So at the beginning of the month I had 11 books on my TBR. Throughout the course of the month that went up to 14 and then I went back down to 12 and now it's really anyone's guess how much I'm going to end up reading the rest of the month. But I'm going to talk about 8 of those books today. And I thought I would go in the order of which I read them to keep it a little bit organized for me, and I'll kind of do some stats at the end. So the first book I want to talk about briefly is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Now, I didn't read this one for my OWLS, but I had to finish it still in April. I read 550 pages at the beginning of April to finish this book. Overall, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I do like the Harry Potter series. Goblet of Fire tends to get a little bit of a bad rap in my brain when I think about the series because it comes after Prisoner of Azkaban, which is my favorite. I think I was able to pinpoint kind of why this one always rubs me slightly the wrong way. And it's because it is the beginning of my disillusionment with Dumbledore. It happens in this book, and I think I've only read this one maybe 4 times, 5 times total now maybe, but I did enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars. I forgot how neatly everything kind of ties together and how much it sets up for the future. I love that my boy Sirius was so involved. I always forget that he's pretty prominent in this one, as prominent as a fugitive on the run who's masquerading as a dog can be. But yeah, so I gave this one 4 stars, and I will have more thoughts on this in a future series of videos on my Harry Potter reread, so I'm not going to say too much more about it. Then the next book I read was The Incendiaries by RO Kwon. This is a contemporary story that follows Phoebe and Will, who become a couple and are a couple for most of the book, and how they both kind of fall prey to a religious extremist organization and cult. Now, I gave this one 2 stars. I liked the writing was really beautiful at times, and the atmosphere was really good, and the characters felt as believable as they could be. And I say that with a caveat because we never really got to know Phoebe at all. We only know Phoebe from Will's point of view. Any point of view in here that was labeled Phoebe was actually Will's imagination of what he thinks she might have been doing, what she might have been thinking, what she might have been saying at that time. So it feels like we have an idealized version of Phoebe. And so it was a little tough to really, come to care about Phoebe because she was so distant from us. In that sort of same vein, it's also why I didn't end up caring too much about the end of the book and what happens. So spoilers for the end of The Incendiaries. Although it's not totally a spoiler because it tells you right at the beginning that there was a bombing. This religious extremist organization that is a cult that Will eventually tries to get Phoebe out of and ends up pushing her towards it, ends up bombing some abortion clinics. And it's this idea that Will has to come to terms with the fact that Phoebe was involved because the Phoebe he knows and remembers would never have done this. They have footage of Phoebe being involved, and then it's implied that she commits suicide after the act. I think that moment would have just hit harder for me if I had known more about Phoebe, and she was just so distant from me that not that I didn't care about her plight, but it didn't really resonate, I guess. Now, the other main criticism that I had for this book is that the main point of view character, Will, he ends up raping Phoebe in this book, and that is a trigger warning that I wanted to put out there. It is not graphic, it is not, incredibly violent or anything like that, but it does happen, and it is the end of their relationship. It's what drives Phoebe even further into this cult. And my frustration is that because we're in Will's point of view, we never get to see Phoebe deal with the aftermath. It's all from Will's point of view, and it's about him being upset and unsure and not knowing why Phoebe broke ties with him. And so I didn't really care about him either. So because I didn't really care about the characters, I didn't feel invested in their story, and it just kind of ended, and it was good, but I mean, it was just kind of good. So that's why I gave that one 2 stars. So then the next book I read was A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. I gave this one 4 stars because I loved the Beauty and the Beast retelling aspect of it and the mix with modern world. So A Curse So Dark and Lonely is about Ren, who's a prince in Emberfall, who was cursed by a sorceress named Lilith to basically turn into a beast of some sort at the end of every season. And then when he's done going on a rampage, he comes back to life as a human again, and time sort of resets for them. A Curse So Dark and Lonely is basically Harper and Ren sort of falling in love over the course of the novel, and Ren really learning to be a better person and like not... Because I hesitate to say like he was awful, but he was very much wallowing and very self-pitying. And granted, like, he's been tortured, like he lives with the guilt of the things that he's done as the creature and like the people that he's hurt and killed. Like, there's a lot that's happened, but I think he needed to remember that there are other people around, not just him, and Harper helps him do that. So he ends up helping his people kind of prepare for a potential war. Like, he basically helps set up his people in the best possible position, so if and when the curse doesn't break, they will be in a position to defend themselves. But I did really enjoy this book. I really liked Ren, I loved Harper, I really liked Gray. I thought it was an incredibly fun read. I liked the twists on the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. I liked the world that Brigid Kemmerer built. I just really enjoyed this book, so I gave it 4 stars. And then I read the sequel, A Heart So Fierce and Broken, and I did not like it at all. I have a whole entire video on my thoughts on this book specifically that go into massive detail and spoiler territory that I will link up here. I gave this only 1 star, even though I finished it, because I would have DNF'd this book. I think the story that was trying to be told in this book fell incredibly flat. It doesn't take into account anything that happened with the past. It doesn't take into account character development. It just tries to be a brand new story, but it's trying to be a brand new story as if we hadn't been there for the first part of the story. I think Gray and Liamara, who are the point of view characters in this book, feel like rehashed Ren and Harper. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't think there was enough. I didn't believe Gray's reasoning for not going to talk to Ren anymore. It just felt forced and very produced, and I really didn't like it. I gave it 1 star. I don't think it should have. It just didn't feel like a sequel. It felt like a sequel to a book that I didn't read, is what it felt like. It felt like the entire setup that we got in A Curse So Dark and Lonely kind of was just thrown away to make room for the new canon and the new way that things are in A Heart So Fierce and Broken. But the fact is, we read the first one, so we know how things are, we know where they were set up, and even though we're changing points of view characters, so things could change potentially, or at the very least, the way we see things now, the actual facts of what happened don't change. And it felt like both the author and Gray kind of completely forgot all that had happened and all that Ren had done. And so this idea that we start this book and it's basically like, Ren is evil now. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, there was just too much that they were asking me to forget about. And if you have to do all of that work to make a sequel happen, maybe you shouldn't have made the sequel in the first place, is kind of my thoughts. Anyways, the next book I read was Someone to Love by Mary Balogh. And this is the first in the Westcott series, and I'm doing a read-along of the entire Westcott series on my channel for anyone who might be interested in getting into historical romance. So I'm curious to see how this series plays out. I gave this one 3 stars because it was completely fine. And that's kind of my thoughts on it in general. I liked Anna, the main character. I liked the setup for the entire series. I liked 2 of the side characters. I didn't particularly care for the love interest, Avery, and his and Anna's romance just felt kind of rushed, and also like it came out of nowhere. So I was not invested in anything that they were doing. They got married, and all of a sudden I was supposed to believe that they were just in love now, and I didn't. So I gave this a 3 because I did still enjoy it. I still had a good time. It was exactly what I expected it to kind of be, even though there were things that changed that I wasn't expecting. So I gave it 3 stars at the end of the day. The next book I read was The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, which is a gothic story from the 1500s or 1600s. I can't quite remember. And I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. Like, I saw the kernels that began the gothic fiction movement and gothic romance movement. I just still have no real idea of what happened in this story, though. But the atmosphere was really good. I really enjoyed the feeling of the castle. The atmosphere was really good. I did like some of the characters. It did just kind of feel like lightning pace for how much we got through and how many characters were involved in an 80-page novella. So, yeah, 3 stars. It was solid, and that's kind of all I'm going to say about it. The next book I read was The Widow by Fiona Barton. This is a thriller that sort of follows and tries to explain the story of this man named Glenn and his involvement in a potential abduction and murder of a little girl. It's told from his wife's point of view, Jean, the detective Bob, and the reporter Kate. And it sort of it's like 2 parallel time frames. One is happening with the case, which we're mostly following Bob's point of view, and occasionally we'll see like Kate and the wife Jean's point of view. And then the other timeline that we're following is a few years later after Glenn's death, and that follows mostly Jean's point of view and Kate, because Kate is trying to get the full story because she believes that Jean knew more than she was letting on, and wants to know what really happened because Glenn was arrested, he was put in prison, they had a trial, but because the police kind of pushed evidence forward and they pushed through the case very, very quickly, it did not stand up in court, and so he was released, and not only was he released, he was actually given a settlement because of, he claimed, police harassment. I really did enjoy this book. I liked the kind of twists and turns of, am I seeing that he's guilty because the police want me to, kind of thing. So I thought that was really interesting, that I was also questioning what I felt and what I believed and who I thought knew what and when. There is a fair bit of conversation surrounding child pornography and molestation, as well as obviously it's a child abduction and potential murder case that is the center of the novel, so that is potentially triggering for some people. I will say that the conversations around child molestation and child pornography were not graphic. It was just kind of mentioned in passing of some sort, because obviously in this type of case it comes up and there's quite a few characters that are involved in that type of stuff, and so it is something I wish I would have realized before going into it, so I wanted to make sure I said that. I did really enjoy this. There were some minor nitpicks I had with the writing in the points of view, where we were in a third person limited occasionally, and then we would jump to another person's thoughts, and that would always jar me out of the story. The pacing was done so well up to the end, but then when the end happens and we start getting the reveals, it sort of felt a little bit rushed, and I left feeling a little like things weren't fully settled. And so because of that, I think I might only give this one 3 stars, although it's like a really high 3 stars. I just don't think it's quite up to the same level as the other books that I gave 4 stars to. Then the final book that I've read so far is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is the story of Vanessa, and it's again another one that's in 2 different time in 2 different timelines. We follow Vanessa when she's a sophomore in high school, and she begins a relationship with her English teacher, and how that changes and kind of traumatizes her in a sense, even though she can't see it in the present timeline. And in the present timeline takes place in our current time, and the present timeline takes place currently with this Me Too movement happening, and there is a woman who's come forward and claiming that this English teacher sexually assaulted her, and she's trying to get support. And so she reaches out to Vanessa because Vanessa left her high school after having made an announcement that she lied about this English teacher and her, and that she made it up because she was just lonely, and so she had to take the blame for everything that happened and was expelled because of it, which was incredibly traumatizing for her. But she still stayed with this English teacher for quite a few years after this fact. The writing was very, very good. I really liked how she wrote Vanessa. Vanessa felt incredibly believable. She felt real. She was contradictory. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do. She didn't see things the same way as everybody else. And so I really, really liked that part of her. I really liked the kind of tying it in with the Me Too. I also really liked the way that we had a conversation towards the end between the victim who first came forward, Taylor, and Vanessa, and how coming forward for Taylor was something that she felt she wanted to do and she needed to do, and how she was hoping that other people would join her and she would gain some sort of empowerment from it. And Vanessa, on the other hand, is terrified to come forward. She doesn't want that kind of criticism and attention, and it really stems from the fact that when she was in high school, they forced her to sort of take responsibility for this lie without doing any sort of background or investigation into any of the allegations against him. They just trusted the word of a 16-year-old girl, and I just still cannot believe that happened, even though, so even though this one was really harrowing to read through, it was really intense, and it made me feel like I was part of the people abusing Vanessa in a way where, like, I felt like I was just watching this happen and I couldn't do anything to stop it, and so I felt partially responsible as well, even though it's just a book. But that's how I felt reading it. I read this all in one day. I did have to take breaks throughout it. I will say that because the subject matter was a little tough, I think if I hadn't read it all in one go, I don't know if I would have wanted to pick it back up, where if I read like 60 pages today and then I don't know if I would want to pick it up again tomorrow, because it's just knowing what I'm getting into would have been a little difficult for me. But I did really enjoy this one. The writing is beautiful. The character of Vanessa is amazing. And I gave this one 4 stars because I loved it so much. But just be warned as you go through. So out of those 8 books, 7 of them hit OWL requirements for me. The Incendiaries was my divination OWL, which was to read a book from your TBR based on a random number generator. Someone to Love was my astronomy OWL, which was to read a book when it was dark outside. A Curse So Dark and Lonely was my Transfiguration OWL, which was to read a book that dealt with shape-shifting. A Heart So Fierce and Broken was my Ancient Runes OWL, which was to read a book with a heart on the cover or with heart in the title. The Castle of Otranto was my Potions OWL, which was to read a book under 150 pages. So the Widow was my Arithmancy OWL, which was to read a book outside of your preferred or favorite genre, and as this is a contemporary thriller, that's outside my favorite genres of historical romance and fantasy. And then my Dark Vanessa was my Herbology OWL, which was to read a book that began with M. So after those 7 books, I still have 5 books left to read if I want to complete all 12 OWLs this month. So, fingers crossed. Wish me luck. Yeah, so feel free to let me know in the comments below what you guys are reading, if we read any of the same books, how you're coming along with your OWLs, if you're participating in the Magical Readathon. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon.